Good afternoon and welcome to Stand Up for Jehovah. I'm going to talk to you about education today, and here's a quote from an October 2013 Awake. Under the subtitle, Education Higher or Highest, it says, Paul warned the Colossian Christians, look out! Perhaps there may be someone who will carry you off as his prey through the philosophy and empty deception according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary things of the world, and not according to Christ. And within that scripture seems to be embedded everything that the Jehovah's Witnesses hate about education, that somebody might tell you something wrong and you might become their prey. Now, first of all, my argument would be, the more educated you are, the less likely you are to become somebody's prey through philosophy and empty deception, right? The more stupid you are, the more redneck hickey, the more like that you are, the more likely you are to be deceived by their empty deception and philosophy. Anyway, this carries on, this quote carries on. Can you hear my cat mewing? He's really loud. Shut up, big boy. I can hear you. It carries on. Higher education, with its emphasis on academic study, often produces graduates who have few or no practical skills, leaving them unprepared to deal with the realities of life. Often produces graduates with few or no practical skills. Right, that would be apart from nurses, doctors, dentists, teachers, scientists, architects, inventors, designers, engineers, basically everybody that's created everything in our built world, every type of social and human care that you could think of that needs some level of education beyond window cleaning. I have a real beef with that. And then it says, leaving them unprepared to deal with the realities of life. Right, well, the realities of life are often financial problems and relationship problems. One of those can be solved by getting an education, because often an education does lead to a slightly improved financial status. Not getting an education doesn't leave you more prepared to deal with the realities of life. And I would argue, what are the Jehovah's Witness realities of life? Knocking on doors, selling magazines, selling books, selling Bibles. That's not life. That's just being a salesman. Now, can you hear my cat mewing again? Here he is. There you go, big boy. Are you happy now? Shut up. Now, I've got a graph here that somebody showed on a video recently. I know you probably can't see that very well, but it's basically a graph showing the socio-economic status of different religions, what percentage of each religion were college graduates, and what percentage of people within that religion had an annual income of above $75,000, which I admit is quite a lot. That's $75,000. That's currently, on today's exchange rate, about £44,000. Now that is a really good income, but it's not excessive, is it? It's not an extreme income. It's a really comfortable income. It's a nice income that you could bring a family up on. But it's not out of this world. It's not an MP's income or a doctor's income. It's not that high. Now, you might not be able to see, but there we are, Jehovah's Witnesses, right at the very bottom. Now, that is nothing to be proud of. That's nothing to show off about. But I bet you anything that Jehovah's Witnesses would show off about that. They'd see that as some kind of extreme humility competition, wouldn't they? Oh, we're right thick, but we're right good at being godly. Oh, you see, when you're thick, you become northern for some reason. Oh, we don't know nothing, but we know how to deal with the realities of life. I can neither spell nor punctuate, but I can deal with the realities of life, which involve going to meetings and door knocking. Another really great thing about this graph, which I love, is that it shows the average on there. And gratifyingly, the morons are the average. I really love that. The morons are the average religion. So Jehovah's Witnesses have less than 10% of their population are college graduates. and less than 20% of their population have that income that I mentioned. The national average, as represented by the morons, is just slightly above 30% with the income, and just about hitting 25 to 30% of college graduates. Now, God, this makes me really wish that I'd been brought up a Hindu. Look at those bad boys right at the top of the graph. Oh yeah, I wish I'd been brought up one of those. Amusingly, there's the other two after Hindus, the next two down are Reformed Jews and then Conservative Jews. So there's something about, if you start off as a Conservative Jew and then Reform, your percentage of college graduates go up and your income goes up. That's quite nice, that. Maybe we could apply that. Maybe Jehovah's Witnesses could have a Reformed Jehovah's Witnesses branch, and we could push that 9% of college graduates up to 10 or 11. Exciting stuff. Now, I have a theory as to why Jehovah's Witnesses are actively and forcefully discouraged from getting educated. And I apologise if this theory has been, if I've read it somewhere, because I've read so much, it's quite possible that I've got the idea from someone else and now I'm not acknowledging it, I've just forgotten. On the other hand, if I've just made it up and pulled it out my arse, I apologise again. You can take it or leave it as you will. But this is my theory. I think it goes right back to Charles Russell. Because here's the thing, this advice against education goes right back to Russell. He said, it's quoted in a book, What Pastor Russell Said, by Leslie W. Jones, in 1917. The book was written in 1917. And Pastor Russell said, okay, we'll come back to that. Charlie Russell said, my advice is then, give your children an education up to public school limit, not even attempting to take them through high school. For they get plenty of higher criticism in the high schools, and it will not be long before they have it in the common schools also. I'm not really sure what point it was making there, other than don't educate your kids. This is my theory as to why Russell said that, and why that refrain was taken up by every subsequent president. Russell's mother died when he was 9, which is a really sad thing to happen to a little boy. Okay, you've seen my chubby little boy, he's 6, and it would be devastating 3 years down the line to lose your mum. He went into partnership with his father's, clothes shop when he was 11, right? That's primary school, that's the last year of primary school. You think about the children you know. Can you imagine taking one of those sweet little chubby-faced children out of primary school and taking them into partnership in a business? He only had an education up to primary school level, which is not great. And B, he was probably a pretentious little snit who didn't even have a mother to hold him back and kind of modify his view of himself. His dad would have been working full time, okay? His dad wouldn't have been around inputting paternal things like parents do today. He would have been some kind of ancient Victorian dad who maybe just met him on Sunday over the tea table and said, pass the salt, son. So at the age of 11, he's in business with his dad. By the age of 15, dad was sending him out as a buyer for the shop. Now that's really young. I teach 15-year-olds, and trust me, they are painful. They are painful, arrogant, know nothing, think they know everything. Talk about hire a teenager while they still know everything. And especially kids that think they're something. Now, I teach maths, and I get this a lot in every school I've taught in. I always get some kid that says, oh, what do I need to learn maths for? I'm going into business with my dad when I leave school. I've had quite a lot of kids say that. And trust me, this is what happens. The dad, who has very little to do with the son, as is evidenced by parents' evening, takes the son into business with him. By week 2, they are arguing and bickering like bastards. The dad realises that the son is actually the lazy fecker that I've been telling him he was for the past 5 years. Realises that he can't do the job, is unwilling to learn, and all the kid wants to do is sit around with his iPad or his iPod or his I don't know what thing and play. And often, more often than not, that kid that refused to learn anything for 5 years because he was going into business with his dad is then very quickly not in business with his dad because he's an insufferable little shit. Now take that and put a religious layer over the top of it. So not only is this kid an insufferable little shit, but he thinks he's got some religious knowledge. Now we know about these kids, don't we, at Kingdom Hall? It's not their fault, but they have been encouraged to be pretentious. And what they're saying might be right. It is wrong to commit adultery. But coming from the mouth of an 11-year-old, it's inappropriate. Yes, it is wrong to commit adultery. Don't fucking have an 11-year-old telling me about it. All right. What I'd like to be told by is somebody who's had a bit of life experience and hasn't still got breast milk round his mouth. It's inappropriate to be told things from little children. And I feel that this is where Charles Russell was coming from. I honestly feel that it was a jumped up little snit. You had very little parental involvement. Obviously I'm making this up as I go along, but it's based on what I've read about him. So here's why I think he was against education. Something happened. Russell grew up, and at 18 he started going round the streets on a night preaching to the hobos and derelicts, and he used to take a piece of chalk with him and write scriptures on the floor and that. What a little shit he was. You come to me, I'm righteous, I know what I'm talking about. You're 18. Anyway, after Russell grew up and decided to call himself a pastor, even though he wasn't, a Baptist minister called Reverend J.J. Ross wrote a tract about Russell, and it was quite a hard-hitting tract, and it was called Some Facts About the Self-Styled Pastor Charles T. Russell. And in that tract, this is what J.J. Ross said. He wrote it in 1912. He never attended the higher schools of learning, knows comparatively nothing of philosophy, systematic or historical theology, and is totally ignorant of the dead languages, and yet he is successful in making his disciples believe that the most difficult passages in the Old Testament and the book of Revelation are as simple as sunbeam to him. Pastor Russell was never ordained and has no church affiliation. Well, Russell was enraged. He was absolutely outraged that this pamphlet had been written, and it went on, there were pages and pages of it, basically saying he's a jumped up know-nothing, he's not had any schooling beyond the age of 11, he's not a pastor, blah blah blah. And Russell did what he always did, which was threaten to sue the person. And in every other case that Russell had threatened to sue, the person had backed down. And Ross didn't back down. Ross recognised that this would be a great opportunity to grandstand Russell in a public court and get his point across. And so that's what happened. It went to court, and one by one, under oath, Russell was forced to admit that every single point that Ross had said was true. So it said under oath, Russell was forced to admit that he did not know the Greek alphabet, that he knew nothing about Latin and Hebrew. How could he? He'd left school at 11 and then gone straight into business. That he had never taken a course in philosophy or systematic theology, much less attended schools of higher learning, and he was forced to admit that he was never ordained. And Russell obviously was absolutely enraged by this. It said Russell lost his suit against Ross when the High Court of Ontario in session March 1913 ruled that there were no grounds for libel against Ross, and that the case was thrown out of court by the evidence furnished by Pastor Russell himself. Pastor in inverted duberies. Right. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be a theologian to have opinions about things. But actually, the more you learn, the more you read and the more you understand, the more you realise that you don't know. I didn't realise anything about the Trinity until I started reading about the Council of Nicaea and the decisions that were made in the 3rd century. And I started thinking, oh wow, I never knew that. So this was just decided and this was just agreed, and actually it wasn't based on this and that. And the more you learn, the more you realise what you don't know. Russell never had any idea of what he didn't know, because he hadn't learned or read anything. He hadn't been to seminary. He hadn't learned anything about those councils or any of the other stuff. He was just pulling it out of his arse. And so because he lost the court case and because he was humiliated over his lack of education, I think he got it into his head to say, right, You don't need an education to be chosen by God, to start a religion, to be the ordained one, to be the mouthpiece of Jehovah. You can be any old so-and-so just like me. Who needs an education? And I'm going to stop. Nobody's going to have an education now. No, you don't need it. You don't need it. All you need is my word. And actually that's what Russell did, isn't it? Because he said that if you read the Bible for so many years and if you read his magazines for so many years, that you'd be more in the light if you read his brochures than if you read the Bible. Well, if that's not arrogance from somebody who left school at aged 11, I don't know what is. And there you have it. That is my theory on why everybody ever since has been discouraged from getting an education. It's nothing to be proud of, but for some reason they take it as, oh, we're really great because we know nothing and yet God's still chosen us. We're not some kind of bloody cast off Idiocracy, are we? It's not the Idiocracy film. We're not, but we are. All the intelligent people leave, and all the half-wits and cabbage brains stay in there congratulating themselves and patting themselves on the back about how intelligent they are in God's eyes, even though they don't know how to spell or read or write. And I've finished. Thank you for listening to another episode of Stand Up for Jehovah.